And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. Joining us on the Chapters program today is Pat McGeehan, and we're going to be talking to him today about his career as a writer, his career in politics with the West Virginia Legislature, and more importantly, his latest book, Stoicism in the Statehouse, an old philosophy serving a new idea. And Pat joins us today. He's a three-term state representative with the West Virginia Legislature. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He's the author of Printing Our Way to Poverty, The Consequences of American Inflation, as well as the co-author of the Liberty Essays, Restoring a Lost American Principle. And Pat resides with his daughter Kennedy in Chester, West Virginia. And we're glad to have him today with us on the program to talk about his new book, Stoicism in the Statehouse. So, Pat, welcome to Chapters. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Elliot, for having me on. It's a pleasure being down here.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And I wanted to ask you first, before we get into your book, we mentioned that you are a multi-year serving legislator in the West Virginia Legislature. How did you get into politics, and what got you interested in wanting to serve in the legislature?
Yeah, I never thought when I was younger I was going to end up being a politician. In my family that sort of had a bad connotation to it, so it's kind of humorous. But I grew up in a military family. My dad was an Air Force bomber pilot, and so we moved around when I was young from base to base all over the world, really. But my hometown was Chester, West Virginia. Both sides of my family grew up in the northern panhandle, and I didn't really have a home per se, growing up as an Air Force or military brat, but always considered West by God, Virginia, my home. So my father actually was tragically killed in the line of duty in an aircraft accident. His bomber went down when I was 14, almost 15, and so that's when my mother and I and my two younger brothers moved back to West Virginia permanently, and I went to high school at Oakland High School, the Golden Bears, up in the northern panhandle, and Chester, which is also, by the way, I know you guys are down here in Huntington, but Chester is home of the world's largest teapot, so you guys got to come up and see it. So moved home, and anyway, I was fortunate enough to gain an appointment to the U.S. Air Force Academy, and that's where I went to college and did my 4 years in Colorado Springs. Served afterwards on active duty as an intelligence officer, and did a tour overseas, did a little time in the Middle East, a little time in Afghanistan, and got out, but moved back home to West Virginia, and I just saw that there was a lot of corruption in local politics, and a lot of give and takes, quid pro quo deals, and I was relatively young at the time. This is back in 2008, 2009, and I decided to run for the House of Delegates, the lower branch in the state legislature at that time, and was successful. Had a little big success there. Was elected, and that's sort of how I got into it. And I just I've always loved my hometown. I've always loved West Virginia, and that's really sort of how I got into politics.
So, having served in the legislature for a number of years now, what is something you wish the public knew about the legislature that maybe they don't know? I mean, we read excerpts of what goes on in the legislature, but you guys do a lot of things behind the scenes, I think, that oftentimes don't get covered. So what is something you wish the public knew or thinks the public should know about, either you as a legislator or the legislature in general, maybe that they don't know?
I would say in general, the public needs to know more about all of the inside deals that take place behind closed doors. There's a lot of times where there will be important policies up for a vote, and some of these policies already have a predetermined outcome or a predetermined vote because of different vote swapping and deal making that has already taken place behind the scenes without the public's awareness. And so sometimes when we go out onto the House floor and say I'm speaking against a bill, there's a lot of people that have already committed to vote one way or the other because they've been promised different things. And that's sort of the disgusting, corrupt part of politics that I think some people are probably suspicious of that takes place, But I'm here to say and confirm that it definitely takes place, and probably on a much wider scale than what people even expect or would imagine. And it's unfortunate, and it's really blatant anymore, and I think dishonorable.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I appreciate you being open and candid about that, because I think you address a lot of the concerns people have when they think about not just state politicians, but maybe carrying that over into national politics as well.
Sure.
So I want to ask you about your book, Stoicism in the Statehouse. I found this just fascinating because it ties into so many of the classical leaders and so many of the classical philosophers and leaders of ancient Roman times. But when we talk about Stoicism as a concept, what is that exactly when we think about Stoicism?
So, of course, the adjective stoic that we use in the colloquial sense in the English language would probably just mean someone that doesn't show emotion or a very poker face, that kind of thing. But Stoicism, the philosophy, is an ancient philosophy. It's one of the so-called Greek splinter schools of the Hellenistic Greek philosophy period. So Stoicism was an ancient Greek philosophy that was developed around 300 BC or thereabouts, and it is really a philosophy that focuses on rationality. And some of the great Stoic philosophers from the early Stoic period summarize the formula that a man should live by or a woman should live by to achieve the good life, as the Greek philosophers always talked about the good life, or the life of virtue. Virtue is in itself, from Socrates. They basically stated that the recipe is to live according to nature. Now, the Stoics, when they use the term nature, they didn't mean it as we would use it today in English. When we talk about something that's natural or nature, we're really talking about the origin of a thing. The Stoics, when they talked about live according to nature, for instance, they're talking about a thing's end, its natural state of flourishment, or its highest state of flourishment, or its highest state of perfection. And for man, that is rationality, because we as humans, that's what sort of separates us from the beasts, is our ability to reason. So when they say live according to nature, what that really means is live a rational life, live a reasonable life, live according to reason. And they equated reason also with virtuous progress. So essentially what the Stoics advocated for was one fundamental principle that kind of guided their way of thinking, and that was called the Dichotomy of Control. And that is basically to only focus on what you have direct control over, and to dismiss and try to ignore anything beyond your control. And if you can do that, along with other Stoic practices that some of the great Stoic philosophers talked about, you can come to sort of a peace of mind, a sort of a tranquility of mind, knowing that you are always pursuing virtue and doing the right thing, and you can be content knowing that you are following the right path and you are doing everything within your control to pursue that path of virtue, regardless of what others may say about you or do to you.
There's one philosopher that kind of takes center stage in your book, and that is Cato. Cato is a senator who, in ancient Roman times, after 20 years of being sort of standing against some of the corruption and courageous leadership, and then, of course, Rome was going through some civil wars during that period, he made the ultimate sacrifice. He committed suicide rather than submitting to Caesar's rule.
Yes.
And I did a little research on that story. I'd forgotten about that story from history, but it's interesting how I think sometimes we look at Stoicism, and we look at Stoicism from our leaders and look at that as sort of a passive or just sort of a blah, like non-reactive position. But it seems like that if we look at our politics today, it's making a little bit of a comeback. And I know in Ben Sass's book, he wrote a little bit about Stoicism, his
Right.
book that just came out.
That's right.
So what's one of the reasons? I mean, why do we see Stoicism kind of making a comeback a little bit on the political scene, do you think, having worked in politics and written about this and studied this?
Well, I don't think that there is a massive resurgence in the Stoic philosophy, but I do think there are some people that are writing maybe about Stoicism, not quite about Stoicism, because there's a lot of self-help books that are taking place and that are transpiring across the country and internationally, and so there are some people that are possibly just focusing on Stoicism to make a quick buck, and they're really watering down the message, so to speak. And some of these people are disingenuous, and they're also writing about not just Stoicism, but like Buddhism and Epicureanism and hedonism and things of that nature, and they're mixing and being very eclectic with the philosophy. My book, and I was unaware of any of these other people writing about the Stoic philosophy actually until after I finished the book and was asked to do a bunch of interviews. So, yeah, so.
Very good.
Yeah.
Cato, we talked about him a moment ago, sort of his backstory, but he's really an interesting figure. Other than what he did, sort of committing suicide to kind of resist Caesar's rule as a sort of an ultimate act of defiance, what is it about him that intrigues you? And can we, as a democracy, or as people serving on our behalf, as politicians that we elect serving on our behalf in a democracy, what can we learn from him?
Well, I think Cato, we can learn so much, I think, from his life. And unfortunately, he has sort of been lost to the ages over the last century or so. If you walk into a bookstore, you will probably find dozens of biographies on Julius Caesar, praising Caesar and how much vision Julius Caesar had, and he saved Rome and built the empire, and so I think some of that has to do with we have first-hand accounts from Caesar. First off, he wrote his memoirs on the Gallic campaigns and then on the civil wars, which he took on Cato, and but I think moreover there's an underlying reason. Today the populist, or in the first century BC, during the Roman times, right before the Roman Republic fell, the populists were known as the populares. That was Caesar's sort of party. They dominate political discourse today. It's the same sort of thing. The populists, who are the welfarists and the warmongers, and these are the people that crave power. And I think today power is venerated. Power destroys lives, it destroys property, but it is also venerated. And I think you see a whole lot of that. And see, Cato used to be admired. George Washington had greatly admired Cato the Younger, and so did a number of his peers, John Adams, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, a number of the other founding fathers loved Cato the Younger and admired his virtue, and trying to restore the republic and standing against one-man rule in Rome. And but that sort of went by the wayside, and even Cicero greatly admired Cato, especially towards the end of his life, and they were very they became friends towards the end of their life. They were kind of philosophical acquaintances. So yeah, we've sort of, he definitely needs to sort of be resurrected, Cato the Younger. But I think what we can learn from him is where a principled life leads. And if you are going to choose the virtuous path, you are going to run into extreme struggles and extreme obstacles. But that's where virtue leads sometimes, and you must stay the course if you are going to choose right reason or choose virtue.
When you look at our political scene today, is there anyone that you could identify with, or maybe look at and say, this person is like Cato, or this person has some virtues of Cato that maybe we should pay attention to, or is some of what he stood for passed us by?
I think anybody that demonstrates courage in the face of overwhelming majority opinion, of doing something that might not be very popular, There's a professor from the University of Toronto lately named Jordan Peterson, who Canada passed a mandated legislation, mandated law through the Human Rights Commission that says, hey, you have to use like 35 different pronouns when you address people who are of some sort of transgender sex. And, he just thinks that's sort of nonsense and ridiculous. And this man could be, because of his refusal to do so, could be thrown in front of a tribunal, fined, or put in jail. And he stood up on national news while he was being grilled by a number of different people on this panel. And they said, are you prepared to face the consequences? And he said, yes. I suppose I have broken the law because I refuse to use these made-up words, these pronouns. Regardless of whether you agree with this issue or not, this man has a lot of courage, and he said, I won't use it. I could be brought before the tribunal. If they fine me, I won't pay it. If they jail me, I'll go on a hunger strike. I won't do it. And those are the people that we need, to stand up against, in the classical sense, for classical principles, first principles, namely the defense of life and private property, which is where the classics come from, and get us back to some sort of a sanity, because where we're headed right now is just increased violence, domestically and overseas. Mm-hmm. And that's really what the enlargement of the state and government and the continued growth of government and the politicization of all pieces of our lives leads to, just more violence.
I wanted to ask you too, Pat, about your writing process, because I really enjoyed this book, and what really caught my attention about this book for a variety of reasons is how the writing was so smooth, and how you took a lot of very complex issues with regards to Stoicism and Cato and all the different aspects of that, and really boiled it down to a really easy to read and follow text. As you were writing the draft and putting that together, was that difficult to do? Because I know when you get into some of this philosophical thinking and reasoning, it can get pretty dense. How did you go about that process of trying to get the major points but not overwhelm the reader with so much detail that slows down the story?
Well, I started practicing the Stoic philosophy myself just a few years ago. I'm a lifelong Catholic, by the way, and I don't find a conflict there. They think they live in harmony. Actually, Stoic ethics had a great deal of influence on the early Christian thought, namely Augustine and Thomas Aquinas for sure. But as far as the writing goes, I studied all the primary sources. We have nothing written from Cato the Younger's hand, by the way, except for one fragment of a letter he wrote to Cicero is all that remains from him. I went through and read all of Cicero's letters that we have. There's hundreds of them that still survive. I read, all of Cicero's political treatises. And then, of course, Julius Caesar's primary sources, his memoirs, along with Cassius Dio, his Roman history, some Tacitus, Appian. So basically all of the Roman ancient historians to kind of interweave my own analysis on Cato's life and the fall of the Roman Republic as I sort of have understood it. And so how I kind of made it a little bit easier to read. I didn't want to oversimplify things, but I wanted the layman to be able to pick it up and easily understand what was being put in front of him. I just carefully chose the words, and it just sort of came out, I think, pretty good and acceptable.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah. It's a great book. How long did it take you to write this book?
It didn't actually take me that long. The research probably took a month late at night, just going over ancient text, and I don't read Latin or Greek, so I had to go back and forth between different translations. So I would say I started last summer, wrote for a couple months at night, on and off, And then I had to take a break because my day job picked up, and then I had to start campaigning for re-election. And then I picked it up in late November, and I think the first draft was done by Christmas. But it didn't come out until this past June, just because work at the Statehouse. So I'd say all told, about 3 months of putting it together.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Now, you're the author of a couple of other books. I wanted to ask you about those. We mentioned those at the beginning of our interview. Printing Our Way to Poverty, The Consequences of American Inflation. And certainly, just the title alone has a lot of connotations for kind of what we're experiencing today. But just give us a brief summary of what that book is about. And did that book come before your Liberty Essays book, or that was the first one?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my first book I wrote back in 2012. I think I made some important contributions to the field of economics in that book, but it is about monetary policy, mainly about central banking, and how over the last 100 years, central banking and the debasement of the U.S. currency via the Federal Reserve and government spending in Washington has essentially destroyed American manufacturing. It has really destroyed the middle class, and it has also led to increased foreign wars overseas that are very unnecessary. And so that's what that's really about. And then it also explains why depressions occur, and it puts a lot of myths, I think, that public school students are taught to bed. So that's really what that's about. It's a little bit more academic-ish, but if you want to really understand monetary policy from a free market standpoint, it might suit your purposes there.
How about your second book, The Liberty Essays, Restoring a Lost American Principle? Tell us a little bit about that.
That was I co-authored that with a close friend named Ashley Stennett. That's about 350 pages long, but it's really a series of essays broken down into different categories. Myself, I wrote, and then Ashley wrote, and that deals with natural law philosophy. It deals with some Greek philosophy that I wrote. It also deals with free market economics. It deals with constitutional government, and it deals with a non-interventionary foreign policy of peace, basically. Basically, all of these principles that you would think of under the umbrella of liberty. If you love liberty, then you should understand and advocate for a lot of these principles, namely free markets, non-intervention overseas, sound money, constitutional government, these types of concepts, and we try to boil it down for the layman, all in one book where you don't have to read it from page 1 to page 350. You can pick out what essay you want to study on. So
very good. Which book did you think was the hardest to write?
Actually, believe it or not, the monetary policy book, Printing Our Way to Poverty, I wrote in 1 month. I'd say the hardest book to write was probably the Liberty Essays, because that was my first book I wrote with someone else, and we had to constantly communicate and mix and match and try to figure out, which of his essays we were going to include, which of mine we were going to include, how to cut it down. We didn't want it to end up being 1,000 pages long, right. So that was probably, I think, the most difficult, and we were under a tight deadline from the publisher, so that's probably the most difficult one. This one, my latest one, though, Stoicism in the Statehouse, I'm very proud of, just because I think it could really help someone out, even if they're not interested in Roman history, if they're not interested in early Greek or Roman philosophy or thought, if they're just interested in politics, if they're just interested in a good story, or if they just want some advice on how to live a better life and deal with stress, this book could really help them out. One important thing that memory that I have, and I talk about this in the preface that I wrote in the book, is a meeting I got to meet. I got to meet Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who passed away in the mid 2000s. But I met him as a freshman, a measly little freshman at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's a Medal of Honor winner. And I'd always heard stories about him and how heroic he was from my old man who was also a military aviator like Stockdale. So he came out to the Air Force Academy. I heard he was going to give a lecture on character, and I said, I got to be there. I got to be for this guy. I was 20 years old at the time, I think, but I could recognize a rare opportunity, and I ended up getting his autograph. And well, then later on that year, I had a philosophy class at the Air Force Academy, and then I learned that Jim Stockdale, Vice Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was shot down over Vietnam and spent almost 8 years as a prisoner of war. He was actually the Navy's senior ranking officer at the infamous Hanoi Hilton. So he was tortured probably maybe 30 different times severely. The North Vietnamese held him in solitary confinement for 4 years. 2 of those 4 years in solitary confinement, Jim Stockdale spent in leg irons. But Jim Stockdale was a philosopher, really. After he graduated from the Naval Academy, he went to Stanford. The Navy sent him to Stanford to get his graduate degree, and he just happened to come across the Stoic philosophy in Stanford's philosophy department, and he adopted Stoicism. So after he got out of captivity in North Vietnam, he credited Stoicism, namely Epictetus, one of the greater Stoic philosophers, as enabling him to wither his excruciatingly painful mental and physical incarceration in North Vietnam. And so I learned about that in this philosophy class at the Air Force Academy after getting Admiral Stockdale's autograph, and so that left a big impression on me as a youngster. And so that always stuck in my mind, and it kind of carried me back to it when I started researching the ancients again, and that's sort of why I decided to go ahead and practice Stoicism myself. So it's really helped me deal with, let's just say, egotistical personalities in the legislature, but it's also led to improving family relationships in my private life and allowing me to gain more patience and a bit of calmness and peace of mind, and always trying to do my best to do the right things.
Very good. Excellent. So, Pat, in our final moments with you, if someone would like to get in contact with you to talk to you about Stoicism in the Statehouse, your latest book, or talk to you about Printing Our Way to Poverty or your Liberty essays, first of all, how can they get in contact with you, and where can they get copies of your newest book?
Well, I'm always on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. My email address and my personal cell phone number are listed on the website of the West Virginia Legislature's website. So they can contact me by phone, by Facebook. They can shoot me an email. My email address is patmcgeehan2014@gmail.com. All one phrase there, or they can just look it up on the legislative website. And sure, and if they want to buy, it's on sale, I think, on Amazon right now, Stoicism, the Statehouse, for about $13. I think it's under 200 pages, but it's an easy read, and so if they want to pick it up, that's fine. But I think people might be surprised and they might enjoy it. So,
yeah, I think folks should read this.
I was very surprised and mildly pleased because it went to #1 in its category for a few weeks on Amazon. So I was kind of satisfied, but as a Stoic should say, that's a preferred indifference.
I was going to ask you how would a Stoic rephrase that. Very good, very good. I love that. So Pat McGeehan has been our guest today here on Chapters. We've been talking about his latest book, Stoicism in the Statehouse, an old philosophy serving a new idea. A fascinating book for, as he said earlier, people that are interested in history, interested in philosophy, but would like a good story and like some information that could be applicable to their lives no matter who you are or what what you do. It's a fantastic book, and congratulations, Pat. I appreciate you coming on Chapters to talk about it, and as you keep writing and publishing, we'll have you on more to talk about your book. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Appreciate you having me here.
We also want to take a moment to say thanks to Chris Dargish and the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our on-site support and assistance today. We encourage you to come down to Empire Books and News to pick up a copy of Pat McGeehan's latest book, Stoicism in the Statehouse. It's available right here at Empire Books and News. And we also would like to remind you that many of the other author, editor, and publishers that have been featured on the program have their works for sale right here at Empire Books and News. So whatever reading taste you're looking to get satisfied, stop by Pullman Square and check out the selection of books and offerings they have here at Empire Books and News. We appreciate their sponsorship each and every week here on the program. If you're a social media user, we have made it available and made those social media platforms available to you to reach out to the program. The first way you can contact us here on the show is through the email address that's right here at the bottom of the screen. It's lp4@zoominternet.net. We do ask that you include your name and the community or town in which you're writing from so that we can keep track of that correspondence. If you like to watch programming on YouTube, we have a Chapters page through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube, and that address is right here at the bottom of the screen. Once you type that into your search browser, just click on the Chapters tab, and we've got all of our author, editor, and publisher interviews archived for you right there through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube. And we also have a Facebook page. If you're a Facebook user, all you need to do is go to the address right here at the bottom of the screen. When you type that into your Facebook browser, you can go and check out our more recent programming archived for you right there on the Facebook page. You can share it, you can interact and comment with viewers of the program there. So if you like Facebook, you like YouTube, you like email, we've made it possible for you to stay in contact with the program through one of those social media platforms. We know many of you have done that. We appreciate that so much. So please keep those comments and feedback coming. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.